I dream of a landscape that pulls me deeper into darkness. For months now, my sleep had been growing increasingly restless. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, sweat on my forehead, but at first I couldn't remember what I was so afraid of. Over time, however, the memories of my dreams became clearer. I kept having the same dream, an endless gray landscape beneath a black sky. The air was heavy and oppressive, and the ground, if you could even call it that, felt unnatural. Firm, yet somehow viscous, like the floor of a swamp, recoiling from the touch. I could never quite say how large this landscape was because the horizon simply didn't exist. The ground vanished into the mist, which was woven with a thick, almost liquid darkness that seemed to move as if it were alive. It appeared to be breathing, as though it were something that constantly shaped and reshaped itself, waiting for me in the background. The black sky? It wasn't really the sky. It was more of a void that filled the entire space above me, without stars, without the moon. Just an infinity of darkness that swallowed everything you tried to focus on when you looked up. I could never tell if it was day or night because time had no place here. Everything was just this dull gray that stretched over the expanse. Then there were the voices. They whispered, buzzed around me, barely audible, like the rustling of dry leaves in a wind that didn't blow. At first, it was just a murmur, like overhearing a conversation from afar, unclear and impenetrable. But then with each passing night, they became a little clearer, and soon they began to form words. They weren't human voices, not in the sense that they spoke a familiar language. They were more of a strange mixture of sounds I had never heard in my waking life, like the hiss of iron sliding over glowing coals, mixed with the sound of waves crashing against rocks, intertwined with a distant singing that felt like it was both buzzing through space and drilling into my mind. Sometimes when I focused on them, I could make out individual words, but they made no sense. They sounded ancient and forgotten, yet somehow like fragments from a time that had never existed. And then there was this melody, this eerie melody that kept returning, soft, yet with a sound that burned like a threat into my bones. I couldn't bear to listen to it, but I knew I couldn't just look away. It was as if the landscape itself held me in place, forced me to listen. That melody pulled at me like a magnetic force, as though it wanted to suck me into its depths, until I had no memory of anything outside this place. I knew I shouldn't be there. The feeling was suffocating. It was as if something in the very air itself mocked me, ridiculing the fact that I had made it this far. Every fiber of my body screamed to leave, but I could never move. It was as though the mist around me drained the strength from my limbs, paralyzing me, forcing me to hear the voices which were growing louder. They told me things, whispered warnings I could never fully understand, but deep down, I knew they weren't good. They were there to watch, to wait. Their words felt like a promise, but one of horror. A promise that at the end of the road I wouldn't escape. I knew I shouldn't listen to what they were saying, but the compulsion was too great for me to simply turn away. It was as if every fiber of my consciousness was woven with these whispers, as if the voices were nesting in my thoughts, binding me, making me search for answers I should have never found. One morning, I woke up drenched in sweat, with an image in my mind that I couldn't shake, an old, yellowed magazine lying on a large table right in front of me. The title was barely readable, but the words "The Path to Enlightenment" stood out. I had no idea what it meant, but when I passed by a flea market later, there it was, lying right there between old newspapers and tattered paperbacks. I had to buy it. I should never have, but I just couldn't help myself at that moment. As I was about to walk past the stand, a strange, indescribable feeling of longing and pain welled up in me, and it only faded after I unknowingly handed the vendor $5. At home, I flipped through the pages. It was full of short stories, but none of them really made sense. One was about a city without a sky, where people walked in circles because they couldn't stop. Another described a staircase leading deeper and deeper into nothing. And then there was a story about a cult that didn't fear death but sought it because it was the only way to ascend. I felt sick because the words I found written here were the same words I had heard before. In my dreams, I read on. Each word felt wrong, as if they were never meant for human eyes. By now it wasn't even English anymore, but I could still feel deep inside me what these symbols meant. The members of this cult had sacrificed themselves willingly, and yet no bodies were ever found. They had simply vanished, as if they had left the world. A passage stood out to me in particular. The body is a shell, a shackle. Enlightenment comes only to those who are willing to receive it. Sleep is the first gate. Death is the last. At least, I think that's what it says. I can't really translate these symbols properly, but I don't know if a normal person could make anything of them anyway. A lump formed in my throat. This was the very whisper from my dreams. Every time I woke up, the words still echoed in my head. I wanted to put the magazine down, throw it out of my apartment, but I couldn't. Something forced me to keep reading. I don't know how many hours I spent just reading that damn story, but when I finally managed to tear myself away, the sun had long set. When I finally turned the last page, I was relieved that it was over, but then I noticed something. The last page was different. It wasn't printed text, but handwritten notes. They were messy, as if someone had written them in a hurry. I see them now, even when I'm awake. They know I'm reading. I'm not alone here anymore. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I assumed that the previous owner of this magazine had gone through something similar to what I was experiencing, and probably lost their mind in the end. I was afraid of ending up like them. So I gathered all my resolve and finally threw the damned magazine out the window. As soon as I couldn't see it anymore, I immediately felt mentally better. I made myself a cup of tea and went to bed. That night, after throwing the magazine out the window, I thought I could finally rest. Maybe the nightmares would stop. Maybe I would become normal again. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I woke up again, drenched in sweat. But this time it was different. The darkness around me was still there, as if it had sneaked into my room. And again, that strange, oppressive mist was there. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy and numb. The voices were back, louder and clearer than ever before. They weren't just whispers anymore, but a singing that penetrated me. It wasn't just a background noise anymore, but a symphony that coursed through every cell of my body. And this time I could understand them. You must come. You must follow us. The gate is open. You are already chosen. The words burrowed into my mind. I tried to ignore them, to look away, to listen away, but the darkness and the voices wouldn't let me. The melody which had haunted me for so long was now an order, a compulsion, that there was no escaping. The images flickered before my eyes, distorted faces, staring at me from the darkness, their eyes empty but somehow knowing. They didn't laugh, but their presence was filled with expectation. I knew they were waiting for me. I knew I had no choice. We are waiting for you. You will understand once you come to us. I screamed, wanted to fight back, but it was too late. The voices penetrated everything I thought, everything I felt. It was as if they enveloped me, as if they were pulling me under their spell. This presence was so strong that I couldn't tell where my thoughts ended and theirs began. Every second that passed felt like an ever-deepening abyss. I tore myself out of the dream, but when I opened my eyes, I was still in the same bleak landscape. This infinitely wide gray plain was my prison, and the black void above me was my doom. I hadn't moved. I was still there in that endless breathing darkness. The voices were louder than ever. They now seemed to echo in my very being. You know you must do it. We have chosen you. You will understand that this is the only way. I could no longer fight back. The words came not just from the voices, but from within me. It was as though they tortured me from the inside out, as if this obsession to join the cult was the only path I still knew. And then I felt it, this endless exhaustion. Sleep, which I no longer knew whether I was in or not, only brought more fatigue. Every time I tried to fall asleep, it felt like I was being sucked deeper into an abyss that drained me dry. My thoughts slowed. My body was as heavy as lead. I could do nothing. I felt trapped in a nightmare that had no end. Each night was worse than the last, and yet, the more I fought back, the more the compulsion to find this cult, to join it, grew. The darkness was taking its toll, and I knew that the only way to find peace was to follow the cult's path. And here I am now, in the middle of this torn state as I write these words. I can't stop typing them. The darkness presses against my eyes, pulling me deeper into its wings. You must come. You must follow us. We are waiting. I am tired, exhausted. Every night feels like the end of my sanity, if I even have more than one night behind me since I threw the magazine out. I don't even know if I'm awake or still in one of these dreams. To me, it all looks the same now. Even if I should be awake, it doesn't matter anymore. Sleep will always get me back, again and again. Every night will deepen this nightmare. I only see one way to escape it and have at least some hope of finding peace. Go to them.